When Pius IX died in February of 1878, the Catholic Church was the weakest, most besieged, most politically humiliated institution in the Western world. The Papal States were gone. The Pope had been a prisoner in his own city for almost a decade. Catholic schools had been closed across Prussia. Religious orders had been expelled from France. Italian troops were patrolling Rome. The intellectual movements driving every government in Europe, rationalism, materialism, positivism, historicism, had declared the Catholic faith philosophically obsolete. The man the cardinals elected to follow Pius IX, a 67-year-old Italian aristocrat from a town nobody had heard of, looked at all of it and decided the way to fight back was not with another syllabus. It was not with another condemnation. It was instead with a 13th century friar.
Okay, so there we go. That's a little more like it. Everybody, I apologize. I completely forgot that we set this thing for 7 p.m. tonight, and I set a haircut appointment for 7 p.m. And Rob texted me, and he's like, "Are you coming?" And I'm like, "Holy cow! I cannot believe I totally bungled that one." So sorry for the hour late start, everybody. Yes, I got a glow up, Jim.
Just because he started using knickknacks.
No, actually, this is what happened. I forgot my knickknacks. My brain farted, and then I totally blew the. I don't know. I don't even know what phrase I was going for there. I'm gonna pull a Candace Owens and just make one up. Yeah, I must have had a brain zap from lack of knickknacks, and I forgot the show started at 7. Thank you. I'm working on the lighting still. I don't know exactly how I'm going to work this out. I have to still get, my wife has like a light diffuser that I'm going to try and use, but still got to figure that out. Still ironing out the kinks. Yeah, knickknacks. I wish my sister had some.
Oh boy.
We have quite the story for everybody on Locals tonight. My sister had a pretty bad injury with a lawnmower on Sunday. And, I had to go to the emergency room and spend the day with her. So I'll tell that story over on Locals. We don't have a knickknack success story tonight, though, but go to knickknack.com. Use code AB25, 25% for 25% off your first purchase. Use AB10 for 10% off subsequent purchases. We love knickknacks. They are our premier sponsor on this show.
They're our bread and butter.
They're our bread and butter. If it wasn't for them,
but you probably shouldn't. It helps you eat less bread and butter too.
It is a great fasting assistant. It's like a fasting aid.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm not kidding. If I got to make it through the day, Knickknacks helps me get there. So sticking to one meal a day is much easier with Knickknack. And also blackmonkrosary.com. Go to Black Monk Rosaries. Wrong one. Go to Black Monk Rosary. Use code Avoiding Babylon at checkout, and you will get 10% off your amazing Black Monk Rosary. We love Black Monk Rosaries. Great gifts for confirmation, communion. I think that season's kind of passing. Good wedding gifts, birthday gifts.
This time of the year is also when most priests are and were ordained. So if your priest is having an ordination anniversary upcoming, great gift for that.
Yeah. Did we miss what's coming? What came last? Mother's Day or Father's Day? Father's Day's coming up.
Father's Day's coming up this month, yeah.
Father's Day's coming up. Get your father a Black Monk Rosary. Great gift. So now, yeah, so we got some I have a wild weekend story to tell on Locals when we go over there. So stick around for that. This episode, man, I think I'm gonna take some interesting turns on it. Like, I honestly, in the encyclical itself, I did not highlight any of the Thomas stuff.
Really? I highlighted almost all of the Thomas stuff.
I actually, like, half the encyclical is about St. Thomas.
It really is.
And I kind of thought you would jump on some of the Thomas stuff. So I was like, I looked for some unique things. First off, the intro to it is probably one of the most amazing encyclical intros in the world.
Leo. So the last two encyclicals we did, not counting Vatican I, because that was written really differently.
Ocean's not that far off.
But Gregory's Merari Voss, and then Pius IX, like they were written well, obviously, but they were like, it's a good way to describe it. They were to the point, right? They cut right to the heart of the issue, and not that Leo the 13th doesn't, but he just writes really well.
Yeah. I also want you to bring up the outro to Magnificat Humanis, or whatever Leo the 14th encyclical was, because especially with all the Leo encyclicals we've been, but all the encyclicals we've done so far, the entrusting everything to Our Lady is such a common theme in every single one of them, right?
Yeah.
And I haven't read the latest encyclical, but I do want to see the last paragraph and see the difference in the modern encyclical versus the preconciliar one. Yeah, Bobby. Definitely. But also, like, man, I want to talk about AI tonight, because some of the things that Leo is getting at in this kind of it leads to the malformation of how all science and all stuff is done, and you're now in this realm where they're playing with genetics because they no longer have this Christian philosophical grounding. They're playing around with things that the medieval world never would have dreamed of doing, because they had a moral conscience. And it seems like everything Leo the 13th is talking about in this was not listened to or heeded, and we are in this insane mess today that is eerily similar to the world in the time of the flood.
Yeah, well, I mean, we'll get into it with the encyclical, but he talks a lot about how good philosophy and theology isn't opposed to like physical sciences. It's a help to it. And the problem with the physical sciences at the time, and the problems he foresaw, was people doing it just to do it, just to advance themselves and things, and not not for good purposes. And it's a really telling warning, especially with what's going on with AI and everything.
Yeah, that's why kind of some of the disappointment in Leo the 14th encyclical, right? Like, especially after reading this, like it's like the popes between the first 6 centuries have like the most amazing popes. They're all martyrs, and the greats, right? Then you get this period in the Middle Ages, in the early Middle Ages, late Dark Ages, I guess you would call that period. I don't know why they call it that. Where you get the pornocracy, and you get these people fighting for the papacy. You get Theodora, and all the women like are involved because their families are powerful and they're getting their influence.
Theodora, I think, was before the 6th century.
Yeah, she was actually 5th century. 5th,
but
5th century. It might have been Theodosia. I'm thinking of, like, I don't know. There's this whole period in like the late Middle Ages where you just have like one wicked man after another, and then that kind of culminates in Alexander the Sixth. And then once you hit Trent, like from Trent to Vatican II, it is just one amazing pope after another, man. You might have one or two duds.
I think, but between Trent and like the 19th century, there's not many good ones, honestly. Like, not as bad as the pornocracy, but they're just kind of meh.
Well, we haven't really done since Trent, right? We've only done since. So what do you think? Do you think like since Pius the Ninth? No, Gregory, right? Gregory the 16th,
Leo. They're just, because before that you had the start of the Enlightenment, and you had, I don't know. I don't know much about those popes.
Yeah, well, that's so a lot of people were saying today to me that they're like, a lot of people have covered this period. I think a lot of people want to go back to Trent.
Yeah.
Which I don't know if we should jump out of order in these. I
No,
think you should stick to the
we
order and
got to
then go
finish
back.
this and then
And then go back. Okay. All right.
Just
All
people
right.
have
So
to realize like there's not going to be like, yeah, there's a lot on Trent, obviously, but like there's large periods of time where there's not many, documents to really look at. And
because Gregory the 16th is essentially the first papal encyclical that we covered, right?
yeah.
Morari
And I mean,
Vos.
there were a few before him, but nothing like Morari Vos.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it'll still be interesting to go back and check those time periods out. The historical stuff. Okay. So especially what Leo the 13th is getting into here, I'm going to be curious to see what saints are in this period. And also like, because I Rob had some good points, and we were talking about it before the show, just about how this kind of, because I asked Rob, I said, what year does Garrigou-Lagrange come, right? Because he's early 19th century. It's not that long after this. He's like born in
early mid 20th century.
20th century, I mean, yeah, 20th century. But this is the end of the 19th century.
Yeah. Yes.
So he's not too far after this, and this could have had an impact. But that, you said, it also could have brought us guys like
the reaction to neo-scholasticism, right, which was what this encyclical and movement birthed. The reaction against that is what brought us the theology, of the
nouveau theology,
Ronner and all those guys that were so big around Vatican II, and now everyone's been raised in a world that has that as its base. So that in the encyclical, Leo talks about the state of things, at that time.
Yeah.
And he exhorts all the bishops to bring back Thomism and Scholasticism. But like, I think one of the most telling warnings that I got out of it was he warns them specifically, like, be careful who you put in charge of this stuff.
Yeah.
He more or less tells them, if you put the wrong people in charge of this stuff, it will all be for naught. And well, what do you know?
And they don't listen to any. They don't listen to any of the warnings. It's like, this is why I'm saying, like, these popes were amazing in this period, and it still didn't stop it. You had amazing popes. You had, the liturgy was still great, and it still doesn't stop what's coming. Anthony's red because it's summer. Everybody's asking why I'm red. It's summertime. Like, I am Italian.
He has a boat.
I have a boat, and I'm out on my boat every weekend. I don't know what to tell you guys. But all right, let's get to the historical context. Let's get into Rob's script.
Before I do the history, I just want to say, like, we are giving ourselves basically a week to prepare for these, and like that's a week to kind of come up with some sort of like summary and narrative of what's going on historically at the time. Like, some of this stuff I know really well, some of the stuff I don't. So I try to make sure everything's like actually factually correct, but I'm gonna miss stuff. I'm gonna like gloss over some stuff, all in to try to just build an interesting narrative that is at least mostly accurate to what was going on. So don't expect this to be amazing history, but it's not going to be false either, if that makes sense. Because you got to make it interesting. But
all right, let's jump.
Okay, so where we left off. So if you've been with us through the first 3 episodes, you have a pretty good idea of where the church was standing at the end of 1870. But if you haven't been with us, we'll kind of go over that quickly. So Pius IX had defined papal infallibility at Vatican I on July 18th. 64 days later, the Italians, the troops of the Kingdom of Italy, breached the wall of Rome at the Porta Pia, and the 1,000-year-old papal states were gone. So for the next 8 years, the last 8 years of his papacy, Pius IX lived as the self-declared prisoner of the Vatican. He refused every offer of compromise. He refused every guarantee from the new state of Italy, and he died on February 7th of 1878 with the church in what what historians would basically call its lowest point since the Reformation. But all the secular forces of Europe weren't really done yet. So in Germany, you had Otto von Bismarck. He started what's now called the Kulturkampf, and he was basically arresting and exiling Catholic bishops. The Third Republic in France was working on legislation that would expel the religious teaching orders. In Italy, the new government had seized a lot of church property and abolished religious communities. And basically across all the universities of Europe, from Berlin to Oxford, all the dominant, philosophical schools had basically reached a consensus that Catholicism was done, basically. So then, as we said, Pius IX dies on February 7th. The conclave to elect his successor opens on February 18th. This is the first conclave held after the loss of the Papal States. So this is when the conclave moves into the Sistine Chapel, because they didn't have much else big enough to hold the cardinals.
Yeah.
We the previous two papal elections and a few before that had taken place in the Coronal Palace, but Italy, the Kingdom of Italy, made that like their palace for the head of state. So they move into the Sistine Chapel. 61 cardinals lock themselves in, and it's the first time in centuries where the cardinals are princes of just the church and not like princes of an actual sovereign state.
Yeah.
So they're guests of a hostile foreign government.
There's something interesting about this period is that I don't think we as modern Catholics grasp how much power the church actually had, and how quickly that was evaporating, and how much of an influence cardinals and bishops had over matters of state, because even under King Henry VIII, if you actually understand that period at all, Wolsey is making all these deals for him, and you have the cardinals and bishops are very powerful, and there's this whole period of upheaval where they're trying to get rid of any of that power within matters of state, and they're trying to relegate the church to basically what it is today, where it's oh, your priest can talk to you about spiritual matters, but they don't want them interfering in secular matters whatsoever.
Yeah. I mean, how many of those bishops or cardinals, had just been exiled from, the brand new state of Germany? How many had just recently been allowed to even be Catholic in England? How many used to be secular leaders of a Italian city-state, and now they are kicked out of that? I think we all grew up with the Vatican being just that, the Vatican. That's not what it was up until 150 years ago. It was, it was Rome was the papal states. So I think we miss how, that probably seemed very apocalyptic to Catholics at the time.
Yeah. Really, the papacy is still the last monarchy on earth. Real monarchy, there's probably a couple of smaller ones,
right?
But the English monarchy is really just for show at this point. It doesn't really have much say in things. It's kind of just a tradition at this point. But the Catholic Church is still the one surviving monarchy, and it's this relic from the old world that they still hate to this day.
Yeah,
the King of Jordan, Joe McLean says.
But anyways, you got all the cardinals locked in. The Italian authorities had assured them that they could conduct the election in peace, but no one really believed it at the time. Several of them had argued that the conclave should be moved out of Rome entirely, but of course they didn't. The front runner was a Vatican insider named Cardinal Luigi Bilio, and that's the guy who drafted the Syllabus of Errors under Pius IX. So the expectation was that he would be elected, and that he would be another Pius IX, basically, someone to denounce the modern world from the Vatican. But Bilio was not elected. So on the third ballot on February 20th, So in basically 2 days, the cardinals elected Vincenzo. I'm not going to try the middle name. Vincenzo Pecci, and he was the Archbishop of Perugia. So Pecci was a diplomat and a scholar. He was a man who spent decades at this point outside of the Vatican, running a diocese in central Italy. And there in Perugia, he was quietly building in the seminary, basically one of the most important intellectual experiments in 19th century Catholicism. So Pecci takes the name of Leo the 13th after Leo the 12th, who was a pope known for restoring scholarly institutions. So he comes into his papacy with seemingly with this at the front of his mind, and this ends up not being his first encyclical, but it's within the first year basically. So this was a priority to him, and we saw that Pius IX had fought with anathemas, with condemnations, with the syllabus, but Leo, at least initially, is going to try to fight against the issues of modernism with intellectual formation. To understand what he was trying to do and what he was going to do, you have to understand basically the philosophical battlefield of Europe at this point. So in 1878, there were basically 4 dominant schools of thought, and this is the area I'm shakiest on here. Like I don't study philosophical history very much, so if anyone notices any errors, please correct me. But there's basically 4 schools of thought. The first was Kantian subjectivism. And Kant argued that the human mind can't actually know reality as it is. We can only basically know what we experience, how it appears to us. So the thing in itself, basically the essence or substance of something, is forever hidden from us in Kantian subjectivism. So as Leo saw that with this, the entire enterprise of natural theology was basically dead on arrival, because according to Kant, you can't reason your way to God because reason itself can't really touch reality.
Which is why in the syllabus of errors, it's condemned. If anyone say that you cannot come to the knowledge of God through natural reason, let him be anathema.
Yes.
Because this is already starting to pop up under Pius IX. So by the time Leo comes in, Leo's like, all right.
My wife. Oh. He loves to pick apart how I talk.
I'm glad my wife's not in the chat.
But so under Kant, faith gets demoted to basically private feeling, and truth gets demoted to personal experience. So it's really kind of wokeism in a sense.
It's
right.
It's
or the start of it.
It's postmodernism or something, right? Like,
yeah. So the second school of thought is Hegelian historicism. So George Wilhelm Hegel thought that truth is not eternal. It basically unfolds throughout history, and it does this through a dialectic of thesis versus antithesis, and then them coming together to form a synthesis. So religion for Hegel was a primitive stage that philosophy and would eventually outgrow. To Hegel, every doctrine, like every Christian Catholic doctrine, was just the current thesis that would eventually be reformed and remade through a dialectic struggle with some sort of antithesis to reach then a new synthesis, a new doctrine, right? So, I mean, this is almost not exactly, but kind of like, not Newman's development of doctrine, but like the modernist development of doctrine, right? So, like in historicism, you hear the philosophical seed of every time you hear someone say like the church needs to evolve with the times. That's kind of Hegelian historicism. So the third school of thought was positivism, and this was from Comte. I'm not sure. So Comte and his disciples taught that the only real knowledge is something that can be empirically verifiable, and it's something that is scientifically demonstrable.
It's like materialism.
But yeah, well, kind of. Materialism is related, but so basically they thought like physical science was like the final stage of intellectual development, of intellectual thought, and that theology and metaphysics were obsolete. And then the fourth school of thought is materialism. This is materialism is just that. It asserts that only matter exists. Mind, soul, spirit, God, angels, demons, all of that. They're all just chemical reactions inside of the brain, more or less. There's nothing transcendent. There's nothing eternal. There's only the body.
This
the
ends
grave.
this ends up informing like all of the modern mental health, right? So this is like why they start playing with SSRIs and stuff. Like, oh, you have a chemical imbalance, that's why you're depressed. Like they've completely thrown out the spiritual realities and all these things, and they're like, no, it's just a chemical imbalance, let us just fix it. And that's not actually what is going on with people. They don't even know why those SSRIs work, things like that. It's just everything's just been written off to a chemical imbalance, or somebody's gay because they have a their
they have a gene that we can't actually point to.
Yeah, it's like this is how all of these things that start in this seed form end up blossoming into some of the most diabolical things that we see today.
I mean, really, so positivism, like I don't know so much about that one, but like the other three, like subjectivism, like we talked about, is kind of wokeism, but it's also like modern therapy culture, like it's all whatever you think about it. It's all however you feel about it. And like you said about materialism,
what's your truth?
All of this, I mean, our whole modern world is based on these ideas.
Yeah.
And
unfortunately, so is the theology in the church these days.
Well, so much theology is based on these ideas too, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But another thing these four systems have in common is that they didn't even try to argue against like the Catholic Church. They didn't argue against Catholicism. They didn't even engage it. They just they declared that all of Catholic thought is intellectually like inadmissible. It's all obsolete. Don't even bother with it. And that's what Leo saw as the battlefield, is like the church needs to reclaim philosophy and go to battle with these philosophies that are, were leveling Europe with destruction, basically.
Yeah, because you go back to the early philosophers, and you're going back to the Greek philosophers, and that's what Thomas is dealing with, right? Like Thomism is essentially going back to Aristotle and breaking down Aristotle, taking what's good in Aristotle, even the way he goes through problems and steelmans every single argument, things like that. And they're just acting like Catholic thought is obsolete. It's this archaic thing. Let's just get away from it. And let's just, they were so excited whenever a new philosopher would come around, or a new, a new thinker would come around, and they jumped all over them.
So one thing that we don't realize today, that most of us have no idea, that I didn't even really know before starting to look into this episode, is just how bad things had gotten intellectually in the church at prior to this. By the mid 19th century, so by 30 years before this, the scholastic tradition, the tradition of Aquinas, Bonaventure, Scotus, basically of the entire high medieval theological system that had defined Catholic intellectual life, had collapsed. Like you said, it hadn't been refuted by these ideologies, these philosophies, hadn't been argued against. It was just abandoned, basically. In its place, seminary professors across Europe had basically adopted whatever was fashionable. So, the Cartesian rationalism, the philosophies we just talked about, all these different things they adopted. They abandoned scholasticism and adopted these new philosophies, and the result was basically exactly what you'd expect. The Catholic intellectual class, the Catholic clergy and theologians, basically the men who were being trained to defend the faith, were being formed in these philosophies, in these systems, and of course they couldn't actually do the job of defending the faith.
Yeah, it just shows how it was like, while you still have a good papacy during this period, the clergy are already starting to fall, right? Yeah. And those men that are the clergy learning these things, and this stuff is exciting to them, and they're learning this in their seminaries, they eventually then become bishops. They become the bishops who are at Vatican II eventually, right? Like you're not that far off. You're within 80 years of Vatican II. So these, maybe not quite yet, the guys that are going to be the bishops at the council, but you're getting close to it, and these ideas are starting to take hold within the church. It's not just something that happens at Vatican II suddenly out of nowhere.
I think in our day and age, if we didn't personally see the collapse, we've heard the story of the collapse from our parents or grandparents of the council and what happened after, and in the sexual revolution of the 60s. We see and know how bad the last 80 years have been, right? And we see what it was like before that, and I think we have this idea that
things were great before 1950.
Things were great, and they largely they had been built back up to be great, but prior to a lot, I mean, there's a reason why the encyclicals we've read, were written, and a lot of it's because these issues were there already.
Yeah.
And maybe not as bad as they are now, but
no, the popes were prophetic. They saw what was coming down the pike, and they weren't taking it for granted that, oh, we have the church and everything's going to be fine. It was like they saw this stuff taking root in society. They saw, look, we even look at it today and we're like, oh, look, church attendance drops off a cliff at Vatican II, but there's already people going through the motions because it's still there's the pressure in society to still maintain, like, the you're going to church, and oh, I'm a God-fearing man, but like people aren't deeply rooted in their Catholic faith on large scales. Even at this point, you have people who are not well formed in it, and they're just, it's very much a cultural thing still, and they still have it as a culture, but they're not, there's no apologetical arguments being given to the laity on the ground at this point.
Yeah. The I think we'll end up finding that the popes, of this era did a good job of rebuilding kind of the church, but they didn't do a good job, and they probably couldn't have really of their own volition do a good job of rebuilding Christendom, right? We're seeing how they're rebuilding the church, and it did seem to work, but society as a whole, Christendom fell even harder.
Yeah.
And so you have generations then prior to Vatican II that, while they're raised in a fairly healthy church, they're raised in a very sick society, a very sick
the culture is totally sick. It's just, Christendom is over, right? Like all the revolutions that are taking place, you have all these things happening in the world, and they're getting all of the churches positions, like it's always, they're all trying to subordinate the church to the secular authorities, and instead of having them be in their proper place. But like I think the Pope is seeing that the laity don't stand a chance against this stuff in the long run, right? They're seeing it that, oh man, these people are just going to be so susceptible to it. Like the only thing they're clinging to at this point is culture, Catholic culture, and people still loving their traditions and things like that. Now, as you get into the 20th century, once the television is invented, it's a wrap. There's just the television destroys any kind of culture.
Well, I mean,
it's just this propaganda machine that's just being pumped into every household.
That's what I was going to say. You have people like what's his name? Basically the godfather of modern marketing, who did a lot of work for the CIA. What was his I don't know. Edward Bernays or something like that, right?
Yeah,
something like
sounds
that.
Right. Sounds familiar.
But the government and I don't want to sound like conspiratorial, but like the CIA, and they start using all the power they have to
propaganda.
They think shape the culture, but really it's to tear down whatever culture's left, right?
Yeah, because look, I still say the biggest threat to any government is a united Catholic people. I mean, it just
Yes.
is. A united Catholic front can take down any government.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the only way a government has a chance is if you break apart that unity, because throughout history, they were unable to defeat the church, because every time you start killing Catholics, it just winds up being martyrdom that spreads the faith even more wild. So the idea is that, look, I mean, people have criticized Taylor Marshall for his book, but infiltration is actually what happened. It's this infiltration of wicked men within the church spreading bad ideas. Edward Bernays was Freud's nephew.
But yeah, so this is what things were like in the mid 19th century, and Leo the 13th at the time, Vincenzo Pecci, he was well aware of this, because he had been a cardinal, and before that he'd been Archbishop of Perugia. in Perugia, starting in the 1840s and continuing for more than 30 years, Vincenzo, who would become Leo, and his older brother, who was Cardinal Giuseppe Pecci, who himself was a serious Thomist scholar, had been running kind of a counter-revolution in their own seminary in Perugia. They had founded the Academy of St. Thomas, the Accademia di San Tommaso, and they brought back all the texts of Aquinas. They reformed that seminary's philosophical curriculum around scholasticism. And in this little backwater Italian archdiocese, away from Rome, away from the spotlight, they basically created a working model of what Catholic, a real Catholic formation could look like if it really fought back. And they weren't the only ones. In Rome, there was, believe it or not, a circle of Jesuits at the Civiltà Cattolica Journal. They had been publishing a Thomistic revival for 2 decades at this point. In Naples, there was someone who had been writing systematic Thomistic textbooks. There was a Dominican at the Collegio Romano who was being prepared in this sort of system. Leo would later make him a cardinal. He was being prepared to be one of the basically the principal intellectual architect of Leo's rebuilding. So this had been in the work in a few areas. It didn't really necessarily begin with Aeterni Patris, but had been building in the seminary with Jesuit journals, and just kind of out of the way little areas for 40 years at this point. But what Leo did in 1879 was to take that underground movement and basically put the entire force of the papacy behind it. So it's with that on August 4th, so 18 months into his pontificate, he issues what would be his 4th encyclical. 18 months, 4 encyclicals. Wow. No wonder why the guy's written a third of all encyclicals.
Yeah.
But so he names it Aeterni Patris, of the Eternal Father. The subtitle is on the restoration of Christian philosophy. And it had done something that like no encyclical up to this point had done. And if for those of you who have read it or who will read it, you'll see this pretty clearly. It doesn't really condemn necessarily the philosophies it's working against. It doesn't anathematize anything. It's not the syllabus of errors.
No, it's actually kind of the opposite. What it's doing is encouraging Catholics, and especially the priests and the bishops that he's writing to take up arms with philosophy and telling them, look, even St. Paul goes into when he goes into Greece, he goes into the what the heck is the name of that? The Areopagus. He goes into the Areopagus, and he's points to the unknown God, and he uses the Greek mind and the Greek tools to try and evangelize these people, right? And so none of this document is condemning anything. It's a document of encouragement and it's something that's relevant to us today, right? And we all should, and that's kind of why I want to, after we're done with the historical thing, I want to talk about AI a little bit, and like, I don't know, we'll get to it. So
yeah, so basically the thesis of the encyclical is that the crisis in the modern world is fundamentally a crisis of philosophy. That the answer to that crisis is better philosophy.
Yeah.
And he argues that false ideas about God, about man, about the soul, about morality, all of these false ideas have crept into every area of the state. They've moved from the classroom into the law school, into parliament, into newspapers, into the marketplace, into the family. And that bad philosophy at the top had become bad policy at the bottom. And that basically all the bitter strifes of the modern world were the harvest of this. And the answer, according to Leo, wasn't retreat, not necessarily condemnation, it's recovery. And he argued that the Catholic Church was sitting on the greatest intellectual inheritance in human history, basically what's now called the high medieval scholastic synthesis, not synthesis in the Hegelian sense, and that the church had stopped using it. In Leo, about half this encyclical, Leo basically names the man who's at the center of all of it, right? And it's, of course, Thomas Aquinas. And he names him as the very model and pattern for how Catholic thought should be done from that day forward. And it calls for a restoration of Thomistic philosophy in every seminary, every university, and every Catholic institution on earth. And it wasn't just going to be one option among many; it was going to be the very foundation of it. But there's more to this movement than just the encyclical. That same year in 1879, he founds the Pontifical Academy of St. Thomas Aquinas in Rome with the Cardinal Zigliara as its first director. That was the cardinal he had been forming, for a few decades at this point. He commissions, in 1879, he commissions the Leonine edition of Aquinas' complete works. And it's still actually being completed today. So that's how long it's taken to do this edition of all of Aquinas' works. He poured Vatican funding into that. He poured Vatican prestige into that. And he made very clear that was going to be the direction of the church. He revised the Roman College, which would later become Mark Robertson's favorite institution, otherwise known as the Pontifical Gregorian University. But he revives it as a Thomistic institution. He pushes the Dominican order back to its the intellectual mission of its founding. He elevates more and more Thomistic scholars to being cardinals. He appoints Thomistic bishops. He basically used every single lever he had, which was fewer than any pope had had in centuries, but he used every lever he had to rebuild the entire intellectual foundation of the church from the ground up. So a lot of times when historians say Leo is the pope that really began the church's recovery from the disasters of the 19th century, this is really the beginning of that. And at the very heart of this recovery is good scholastic philosophy. And the results didn't happen overnight, but they did happen. So by the early 20th century, Neo-Scholasticism, which was the modern revival of this Thomistic philosophy, had become the dominant intellectual movement in Catholic seminaries, basically all over the world. And this revival produced figures, like obviously Garrigou-Lagrange, produced figures like Maritain, Etienne Gilson, and you can even figures like Edward Feser, in our day and age.
Yeah.
All of these guys are downstream of this revival. And basically what it did, it gave the church weapons to confront modernism, right? Because when you have like Pius X confronting modernism in the 1900s and theologians working against modernism like Garrigou-Lagrange, that they had these weapons that were given to them by Leo, and that all started
stuff they learned from the institutions that were built up under Leo.
Yep, exactly. But there's the other side of that is when Vatican II opens in 1962, every theological expert there had been trained in this neo-scholasticism. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure we'll get to it at some point.
Yeah, even Benedict XVI, there's when he was Ratzinger, there's quotes of him talking about how they just wanted to get away from Thomism. They were so tired of Thomism,
right?
Yeah.
So they'd all been formed in it. The question really is, did those men of the Vatican II, did they remain faithful
Yeah.
to that inheritance, or did they abandon it? And I mean, I think I know the answer. I think is pretty obvious now, but we'll get to that eventually.
I do think that we do discount how, yes, the council for sure, and the church changing these things for sure, but I don't think we take into account enough how much indoctrination goes on during that period leading up to the council, especially with the invention of radio and television and mass media, and the way they're able to influence the masses, and the education system being taken, like all of the things that Leo is worried about happening in Catholic education, especially. Like there was I was watching that Orthodox priest with the we played the clip on this show with the fake accent. The guy with the fake accent, where he was like, Catholic schools were educating like 65% of the American population in the 1960s.
Yeah.
Like we had the ability in the 1960s to indoctrinate every freaking kid in America. We could have made this entire country Catholic.
Josiah Trenum, is that who it was?
Yeah, I think so. I'm just teasing. Like they could have indoctrinated every single kid to be with a Catholic education and well-formed, and they just dropped the ball completely. And now Catholic Catholic education is no better than secular education. And it's all these Jewish programs that they're running through. Everything, Bill Gates teaching our kids math in the worst way possible. It's all garbage.
And those formed in the neo-scholasticism, like, yes, they were formed, in that inside the church, but they're also formed in part by the society they live in.
Yeah.
Like you have someone like Maritain who was definitely, strongly orthodox in his theology, in his belief, but even as a neo-scholastic, he was also very strongly like pro-democracy, right? And pro like modern political systems and things like that. So who knows what would have happened if society itself had been a little different than it had been.
Yeah. I think all of this is part of God's his divine plan for us.
Oh, Epstein didn't fund McGraw-Hill. Epstein's what was Ghislaine Maxwell, her father was the founder of McGraw-Hill, and also his funeral was attended by 6 former Israeli prime ministers and 5 former Israeli presidents.
Yeah. How much you got left on the historical?
That's basically it. But I know you had some questions about like saints and things.
Yeah, like what saints are I don't know if I want to ask which ones are being canonized or which ones are alive during this period. Like what saints are alive during this period?
Quite a few. Like this is pretty close in time to the visions that Saint Bernadette is having, at Lourdes.
Oh yeah, that's right.
You have the Martins, so Saint Therese and her parents are. Would Therese be alive at this time? If she's not, her parents are, obviously.
Yeah.
You have obviously Newman. Newman's alive. We just talked about that. I know I texted you some.
Yeah.
Let me look through my phone here.
Yeah, you did. Because I asked you then. Saint Bernadette, John Bosco, Damien of Malachi, who's an interesting one, man. I really like Saint Damien.
I know Newman. I know his basic story, but I should learn more about him.
Yeah, Saint Charbel was during this time.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, this is a really, God's
obviously Pius X was alive. Yes, of course. What just happened to my camera?
I don't know.
Can you hear
I
me?
don't know. But now Rob's finally darker than me. Everybody has been having a ball talking about. You guys ever think the problem isn't that I'm red, but it's that Rob's translucent?
Come on now.
And
Not
Hope says
that
you have.
bad.
Hope saying you have a sunburn right now, which is
On my arms, yeah.
okay. All right. So yeah. So let's get into the document itself.
Hold on, let me see if I can get my camera working.
The beginning of the document is one of the great openings of an encyclical, because it's there you go. The only begotten Son of the eternal Father, who came on earth to bring salvation and the light of divine wisdom to men, conferred a great and wonderful blessing on the world when, about to ascend again into heaven, he commanded the apostles to go and teach all nations, and left the church, which he had founded, to be the common and supreme teacher of the people. For men whom the truth had set free were to be preserved by the truth, nor would the fruits of heavenly doctrines by which salvation comes to men have long remained, had not the Lord Christ appointed an unfailing teaching authority to train the minds to faith. And the church, built upon the promises of its own divine author, whose clarity it imitated, so faithfully followed out his commands that its constant aim and chief wish was this: to teach religion and contend forever against errors. To this and to this end, assuredly have. Well, I wanted to pause there because
I'm just. Can you do you think how many bishops alive right now would say that the constant aim, and chief aim of the church is to contend forever against errors?
It's crazy, man. To this end, assuredly have tended the incessant labors of individual bishops. To this end, also the published laws and decrees of councils, and especially the constant watchfulness of the Roman pontiffs, to whom, as successors of the blessed Peter in the primacy of the apostles, belongs the right and office of teaching and confirming their brethren in the faith. Since then, according to the warning of the apostle, the minds of Christ's faithful are apt to be deceived, and the integrity of the faith to be corrupted among men by philosophy and vain deceit. I mean, I could read this whole thing. The supreme pastors of the church have always thought it their duty to advance by every means in their power science truly so called, and at the same time to provide with special care that all studies should accord with the Catholic faith. Like, this is just alien to the modern church.
Yes.
It's sad, because it's all you're thinking when you're reading this. It's like, I wish the church still felt this was their mission, to defend against errors, and instead they're playing footsie with the freaking world now.
They think that the mission and chief aim of the church is to help immigrants, materially.
And to bring about this brotherhood of man without the fatherhood of God,
right?
To bring about human fraternity and just communion at any cost, which is meaningless, because communion separated from the truth just leaves you with, let's just be nice to each other. It's really sad. So would you have highlighted?
So in the next paragraph, he basically lays out what he thinks the issue in the world is. And he says, whoso turns his attention to the bitter strifes of these days and seeks a reason for the troubles that vex public and private life must come to the conclusion that a fruitful cause of the evils which now afflict, as well as those which threaten us, lies in this, that false conclusions concerning divine and human things, which originated in the schools of philosophy, have now crept into all the orders of the state, and have been accepted by the common consent of the masses. For, since it is in the very nature of man to follow the guide of reason in his actions, if his intellect sins at all, his will soon follows. And thus it happens that false opinions, whose seat is in the understanding, influence human actions and pervert them. Whereas, on the other hand, if men be of sound mind and take their stand on true and solid principles, there will result a vast amount of benefits for the public and private good.
I had all that highlighted.
Yeah.
We do not indeed attribute such force and authority to philosophy as to esteem it equal to the task of combating and rooting out all errors. For when the Christian religion was first constituted, it came upon the earth to restore it to its primeval dignity by the admirable light of faith, diffused not by persuasive words of human wisdom, but in the manifestation of spirit and power.
It in our day and age, like, we're told to dialogue, right, with these errors and the people who hold them, with to those who believe men can become women. We're supposed to walk with them in their journey. But Leo is saying, no, we have to combat these actual beliefs and these ideologies with better stuff.
Yeah.
It
Yeah, it's just, Joe, we probably said Leo the 13th was a great writer. We weren't talking about the new encyclical.
I'll be honest, I have not read basically anything in the
I've heard
encyclical
people's like criticisms of it, and I've seen highlights of it, and
I almost kind of want to get through the encyclicals we're going to read, and then see how it compares. But
I got paragraph 4 is the next place I got highlighted. In the first place, philosophy, if rightly made use of by the wise in a certain way, tends to smooth and fortify the road to true faith, and to prepare the souls of its disciples for the fit reception of revelation, for which reason it is well called by ancient writers sometimes a stepping stone to the Christian faith, sometimes the prelude and help of Christianity, sometimes the gospel teacher.
Mhm.
It's like people, that's people who are studying philosophy properly come to the conclusion that we believe in a God of reason, right? Like the world is made up of things that are understandable. And just that alone, just the fact that the world is understandable and able, even through science, you should be able to come to the knowledge of God's existence, because the world is like it has order. Like that
Right.
alone.
Yep. Let's see what I had next. Yeah. I mean, he says here, it is that certain truths which were either divinely proposed for belief or bound by the closest chains to the doctrine of faith were discovered by pagan sages with nothing but their natural reason to guide them.
Yeah.
A little bit after that, he says it is most fitting to turn these
This is
truths,
I had this highlighted,
which have been discovered by the pagan sages, even to the use and purposes of revealed doctrine, in order to show that both human wisdom and the very testimony of our adversaries serve to support the Christian faith.
Yeah, a method which is not of recent introduction, but of established use, and has often been adopted by the Holy Father of the Church. What is more, those venerable men, the witnesses and guardians of religious traditions, recognize a certain form and figure of this in the action of the Hebrews, who, when about to depart out of Egypt, were commanded to take with them gold and silver vessels and precious robes of the Egyptians, that by a change of use the things might be dedicated to the service of the true God, which had formerly been the instruments of the ignoble and superstitious rites. So it's like there. All right. So somebody said earlier, like there needs to be a distinction. Like, just because this is being said doesn't mean that you can baptize every single thing that's happening today. But at the same time, like there's some things which we can take of non-believers and use it against them, to take their own arguments and use them against them. And there is a spirit of that coming out now, where, especially in this postmodernism and people talking about, oh, I don't need God. I could be good without God. It's like, well, what do you mean good? Like you start getting into their own arguments and breaking down what they even mean by these things. So, I mean, there's a level to which we do have to know the arguments our adversaries are using, so that you can kind of, use jujitsu on them and flip them on them.
Do you have anything before the end of the number 4 there?
No.
So right before paragraph 5, I have, if natural reason first sowed this rich field of doctrine before it was rendered fruitful by the power of Christ, it must assuredly become more prolific after the grace of the Savior has renewed and added to the native faculties of the human mind. So
Yeah.
if you know the philosophy of the Greeks and such could figure all that out before they had the grace, you know, before they became Christian, imagine how much, you know, more fruitful, and we see how much more fruitful it was under Aquinas and Bonaventure and Scotus and things like that.
So, like, a part of what I wanted to get into a little bit was like, everything now is kind of like brain rot, you know, like even the shorts that I'm coming across, they're all just
Yeah.
like everything's just so terrible, right? Um, even with AI, somebody posted before that Grok wants money now. Like we've been given AI models for free for a few months now, like maybe a year or so. But I think they were doing that because they wanted to kind of test us out and see what we would be using it for. And they were using it to data mine, right? But we're going to get to the point, especially now they're talking about how expensive it is to run these data centers and all that, that they're going to start charging for this stuff. You're going to start seeing ads on AI. Like, I don't know what is going to happen with that. But what I do think is that there's going to be a segment of people. Yeah, there's a lot of slop out there. And I think there's going to be a segment of people who want to escape the slop. And I'm on one hand, I'm worried that everything's just going to be garbage being fed to us, AI garbage. And on the other, I'm like, even the stuff we're doing with this encyclical series, I think this one was a little slow, but like, I think we got to pick a good one next. But I do think there's still going to be,
There's a lot of good ones coming up.
yeah, I still do think there's going to be a market for people who want to watch long form content, who want to actually learn stuff. What did he say? Taffy's going to go broke making your intros. Oh man.
You want a silver play button, Taff?
Yeah. Oh, we should send them one.
Yeah.
Does this mean that people will stop posting AI pics of them and their non-existent spouse? I've been seeing that too. I hope. Yeah, no, like you talk about, like, you remember when the internet, you used to be able to watch YouTube and there would be like you know, you'd have a 5-second ad, you'd be able to skip it. But now, like, if you don't have YouTube Premium, you're just bombarded with commercials, and it's unwatchable at this point. That's going to happen with AI. They're going to put ads on everything. It's going to be just total shitification of AI, and it's going to be it's I see it already. Like, I even see the way the propaganda for AI is changing suddenly. Like, people are starting to, like, you're seeing those the audience of kids when the commencement speaker came up and spoke, and they all booed her when she mentioned AI.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, man. I'm starting to think AI is just going to be a big flop.
We're in, over the next year or two, it either has to become immensely profitable, or it is going to be the biggest bubble in history.
Yeah, it's going to be the .com bubble all over again, right?
Way worse.
Way worse. They sunk trillions into this thing because they keep telling people it's going to be this thing, it's going to be this thing, and this thing isn't. Like, AI is essentially just a large language model. It's not what it's not. It's all it is. It's AI is a large language model, and people are like, it's not that great. I don't know. I mean, it's going to be a useful tool.
I was going to say, I'm finding more and more that there are things it is really a useful tool at, especially, for instance, like making this podcast. Like, it definitely does help with things that would take me 3 times as long and be half as good, right?
Yeah,
like,
to go looking up books to read this stuff,
right? Or even, I mean, it's gotten better at making thumbnails, honestly. And like, I don't know, like, I want to not use it, but if it's like, our product would be worse if we didn't use it, unless we hired someone with money we don't have. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
you know, if we were if we were like the Daily Wire and could afford someone, then I would rather pay more money for a person to do it. But if it's a question of not having it all or using AI for some things, like, I don't know.
Yeah, that's fine. But I don't think it's going to disrupt the world the way they made it out to be. I don't see robotics coming into the picture. I don't see like they're like, oh, every single job is going to be obsolete. It's like, you people are insane. Do you know how expensive this crap is going to be? It's just going to be way too expensive. And I don't think the everyday person is going to have access to AI like that. It doesn't seem that way. But we'll see. But even like, to bring it back to this, like, I just think that there's going to be a market for people who do want to go and, like, it's going to be kind of like the people who, do you remember, like, I don't know if you're old enough to remember this, but like during like the grunge era, people were like so against corporate stuff.
Yeah.
Like everything was just like, oh, big business, corporate, and they kind of like shunned it. And it was like, you only wanted to listen to, you didn't want to listen to bands that were on the radio. Like you hated the idea of like, you had your garage band that you listened to. And whenever they went mainstream, you were like, they sold out, you know, like you hated it. When Metallica's Black Album came out, everybody was furious. It's like, oh, they sold out, man. Like, I think there's going to be a large segment of people who want nothing to do with AI, and they're going to be those, I don't want to buy into the matrix, man. I want to live, you know, I want to go live off grid, or I want to go, you know, it's going to be like, it won't be the biggest community. The majority of people will be using this crap, but I think there'll always be a market for people who want to not be sucked into this stuff. I mean, they want to hear two people having a conversation. Judging
from the number of people that seem to enjoy pineapple soaked in Kool-Aid, yeah, I think most people will.
I don't get that reference. What is that?
Oh, you have not seen that on Twitter and online?
No.
So a certain segment of the population, a certain very scholarly segment of the population, has come up with taking the big old like Costco jars of pineapple, right? That come, you know, they're like a gallon of pineapple spears inside of, like syrup and, you know, sugar water, basically. They'll take that and they'll pour Kool-Aid packets in it to turn that sugar water into Kool-Aid. And then they'll sell this jar of pineapple soaked in Kool-Aid for like $15 on the street. And Taffy, did you see the clip of the Dispa guy or whatever? I want you to put Ant's face on that guy. If you know what I'm talking about.
It's their own version of sangria.
Basically, yes.
Ghetto sangria. Yeah, I don't know, man. It's just I kind of wanted to just touch on that. But also like we were saying earlier, all the things that Leo was warning about in this, they kind of came to fruition with the way that modern science is done, with the way that they've handled the AI thing. I was really hoping for Leo the 14th to address some of this stuff, but I don't even think those old men in the Vatican have a clue what we're on because the biggest danger we're actually facing, I'm telling you, like, here's the real thing. You ever see Tropic Thunder?
Yes.
You remember the scene where the kid's talking to Robert Downey Jr. about Blu-ray versus what was it? Was like Blu-ray versus whatever other
HD DVD.
Yeah, it was like DVD versus Blu-ray or something, and he's like, well, and then the porn industry went with this, and that's what made the whole industry go with it. What's going to be for AI is going to be the porn industry, and once they start doing AI girlfriends and sex bots and things like that, that's going to be where they make their money, and it's going to be horrific.
So it's going to be wherever the Elder Brothers land.
They're just, that's going to be how they make their money, and it's going to destroy the rest of, like, because you see what a mess the dating world is already, and once you add that factor into the equation, I don't know what women are going to do. Like, I don't know what women are going to do. But hopefully, like some of the menial jobs that women do now, those are the ones that are going to be eliminated, and they'll be forced to actually come up with like a way to, no more OF. Arranged marriages are the way of the future, maybe. But
Yeah.
if I see Tropic Thunder, we've all seen it. I don't know. It's a Catholic show. We're not supposed to watch stuff.
Well, the Zoomers probably haven't seen it.
It's one of the greatest movies of all time. I'm sorry.
It's amazing how quickly the world has changed since then. They'd never make that today. They never could.
No way. Was life worse than this pre-flood? I think it was probably similar but different.
Huh? Really?
The moral decay was similar. I think the moral. Oh, sorry. Wait. I think the moral decay was similar. I think the technology was different, but I do think there was some super advanced technology that we can't possibly fathom today. But I do think the moral decay and debauchery was probably pretty similar. I think that's where we are today. We're at the state of the world in the times of the flood, which is why Our Lady said the world will see a deluge not seen since the time of the flood.
Yeah.
Nikita. So, I mean, dude, there's so much highlighted here. We'll be on here all night. Do you want to grab some highlights?
Yeah. One I circled every time they mentioned Vatican I, which was a lot. But they also mentioned Trent and other things. I have one section that I specifically labeled as important. So let me at least read that. And then we can be done with it. But I mean, like literally half of this is him talking about how amazing St. Thomas is.
And it's like, but we do know that. So I think we could, that's why I didn't highlight any of the Thomas stuff, because we all know how amazing the angelic doctor is. And this whole encyclical, it's like 50% of it is just speaking about the importance of bringing Thomistic philosophy back into Catholic institutions.
Okay. This is kind of long, but I labeled it as important. I don't remember why. Hopefully it's important. This is towards the end. For the teachings of Thomas on the true meaning of liberty, which at this time is running into license, on the divine origin of all authority, on laws and their force, on the paternal and just rule of princes, on obedience to the higher powers, on mutual charity toward one another, on all these and kindred subjects, have very great and invincible force to overturn those principles of the new order, which are well known to be dangerous to the peaceful order of things into public safety. In short, all studies ought to find hope of advancement and promise of assistance in this restoration of philosophic discipline which we have proposed. The arts were wont to draw from philosophy, as from a wise mistress, sound judgment and right method, and from it also their spirit, as from the common fount of life. When philosophy stood stainless in honor and wise in judgment, then, as facts and constant experience showed, the liberal arts flourished as never before or since. But, neglected and almost blotted out, they lay prone, since philosophy began to lean to error and join hands with folly. Nor will the physical sciences themselves, which are now in such great repute, and by the renown of so many inventions draw such universal admiration to themselves, suffer detriment, but find very great assistance in the restoration of ancient philosophy. For the investigation of facts and the contemplation of nature is not alone sufficient for their profitable exercise and advance. But when facts have been established, it is necessary to rise and apply ourselves to the study of the nature of corporeal things, to inquire into the laws which govern them and the principles whence their order and varied unity and mutual attraction and diversity arise. To such investigations, it is wonderful what force and light in aid the scholastic philosophy, if judiciously taught, would bring. I think I highlighted that because he talks about how back when philosophy was good, the liberal arts flourished, science was flourishing,
human flourishing.
But he's talking about how in the 1870s, how the liberal arts then were they lay prone, and were neglected and almost blotted out. Like can you imagine what he would think of life today?
No, forget it. These popes back then, forget it. If they ever saw what we were in today.
Yeah.
So what I want you to do is, while I'm reading this, I want you to bring up the end of Leo the 14th encyclical and just see what the what the end of that encyclical looks like, because this is how this one ends, and this is how almost every single one of them ends.
Give me a minute to bring it up here.
So I'm just going to read it while you're looking. And therefore, let us all, in humble and united prayer, beseech God to send forth the spirit of knowledge and of understanding to the children of the church, and open their senses for the understanding of wisdom, and that we may receive full of fruits of the divine goodness, offer up to God the most efficacious patronage of the Blessed Virgin Mary, who is called the seat of wisdom, having at the same time as advocate Saint Joseph, the most chaste spouse of the Virgin, and Peter and Paul, the chief of the apostles, whose truth renewed the earth, which had fallen under the impure blight of error, filling it with the light of the heavenly wisdom. In fine, relying on the divine assistance and confiding in your pastoral zeal, most lovingly we bestow on all of you venerable brethren, on all the clergy and the flocks committed to your charge, the apostolic benediction as a pledge of heavenly gifts and a token of our special esteem, given in St. Peter's in Rome on the 4th day of August, 1879, the second year of our pontificate. I love that he speaks in the royal we. Do you have the end of it?
Yeah. What?
I mean,
The very end, or
yeah, the very end. I do see the Blessed Virgin Mary.
do you want the last paragraph?
Yeah, the last paragraph. What is it? It's 244.
Yeah.
Well,
no, 245.
Okay, so 244. The Blessed Virgin Mary not only teaches us to recognize God's invisible work, but also directs our gaze to the points in which humanity is broken and the world becomes distorted. The contrast between the humble and the powerful, the poor and the rich, the satiated and the hungry, teaching us to look at the world from a lower position through the eyes of those who suffer rather than the mighty, to view history through the eyes of the little ones rather than through the perspective of the powerful, to interpret the events of history from the viewpoint of the widow, the orphan, the stranger, the wounded child, the exile, and the fugitive. The Blessed Virgin thus becomes poet and prophetess of redemption, because on her lips is proclaimed the strongest and most innovative hymn ever articulated, the Magnificat. It is she who reveals the transformative vision of the Christian economy, the historical and social result that still draws its origin and strength from Christianity. With the same faith as Mary, let us become weavers of hope. I mean, it's a little flowery and cheesy, but I am glad that they're coming to her in our world, sharing who we are and what we have, so that the presence of Jesus may grow among us and his kingdom take shape, and the humble fidelity of daily life, even in the era of AI, can become a time in which the Holy Spirit brings about the civilization of love in our lives. Indeed, the Lord continues to make all things new and offers every era the possibility of becoming part of salvation history in the light of the incarnation. I entrust our desire to the Mother of Christ, to whom the woman of the Magnificat, that she may guide our steps through this time of change and preserve in each of us the true faith of the gospel, so that we may bear witness to the grandeur of humanity in which God has made his dwelling. You know, I'll give it to him. I will say that. I mean, look, it's a little, got a little bit of a commie flair, but I think it was still good.
I have a feeling, some of what Leo the 13th says in Rerum Novarum about, the industrialism and capitalism could read in certain ways too, but
that's true. Look, the thing is that, like, I'm not going to knock Leo for talking about the grandeur of humanity, though, because of the incarnation, because of the incarnation, there is a magnificence to humanity, because Christ redeemed us, because of the redemption, right?
And we were made in grandeur and magnificence,
Yeah, and so I didn't read the whole document, but I'm not going to knock him for saying the magnificence of humanity because of Christ's redemptive work. So much so that if you read Paul's epistles, he talks about we, the church, are something the angels look upon in wonder and in awe at what God has done with the lowliest creature of man, and redeemed him into the saints. Like that, it's actually a really important theme that Paul is constantly touching on in his epistles. So I didn't read the whole encyclical, but I'm not going to knock the theme of it and the end of it. So, but all right, so we're going to head over to locals. I have quite a story from the weekend that man, you guys you can't believe what my sister did. But also, look, if you guys made it to the end, which I'm very grateful for those of you who did, because this one was a little slower than the last couple. But if you guys are enjoying these and you like something a little bit deeper, the next one's gonna be pretty good. We're gonna make sure of it, and we are working our way to Rerum Novarum, which is going to be one of the crown jewels of this series. But if you do like it, Rob put up a tip jar over on our website. You could always, if you're watching the replay, you can leave a tip in the comments. We are going to get super low views on these. They don't generate any kind of revenue. We really do count on you guys to support this endeavor. So we appreciate you guys.
Yeah, just
super
go
chats
to
are always welcome.
www.avoidingbabylon.com. It's right there on the front page. Or if you're watching video, just scan the link, this QR code I have up.
$3, guys. $4. Come on. But all right, so we're gonna go over to locals. Yeah, I want to talk to you guys about my weekend, and I'm sure we'll have some gossip over there. I know you guys love the gossip.
Do we even?
You guys can always bring stuff up in the comments if you want us to talk about something specific. I know somebody had mentioned the comparing. The SSPX documentary looks awesome, dude. I saw the trailer today.
I haven't seen the trailer for it. I mean, I've seen it, but I haven't watched it.
The trailer looks pretty good, man. Kind of makes you realize why the Sedes hate the SSPX.
Because there's more than a dozen of them, and they actually
they just hold they got an aura. I mean, there's no other way to say it. There's an aura about the SSPX, man. I don't know. All right, so we'll go over there. If you guys want to join us, locals is the best way to support us. If you're going to throw us a $5 tip on here, you may as well come over to locals and join there. So we'll see you guys on the other side. Thank you.
I'm just going to cut the video.
Yeah.
Yeah. We don't need to get too fancy here. Okay. Cutting YouTube.